5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off! Join me. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off! Summer of 1969. My best friend Paula and I were outside in the yard when an epic occurrence happened. My mother called us inside to watch TV. Girls! The Apollo rocket's blasting off from Cape Canaveral. Come in and watch. Mommy, we're running through the sprinkler. We don't want to come inside. Get inside. It's historic. We went inside. We were dripping on the kitchen linoleum. We're watching the little black and white TV as the rocket takes off from Cape Canaveral. Now, it was a little TV. The reception was bad. There was a lot of flames. There was a lot of noise. But it did teach us the one essential thing we took through the rest of that summer, which was how to count down from 5 to blast off. And that inspired the game that we played for the rest of the summer. It was a little game that required only one piece of equipment, but that piece of equipment was absolutely essential. And by a miraculous coincidence, Kristen Piedemonte, storyteller, has brought that piece of equipment to, Kristen, I'm going to let you hold it up. Her, yes, a Barbie doll. Thank you, ma'am. Now, Kristen has a Barbie of a contemporary Barbie. I and Paula had Barbies from the 1960s, and they were different than the Barbies of the day. They had less hair, and they were more rigid, as many of us were in the 60s. Barbie's arms were straight from her shoulder all the way down to her wrist. Her hands, the fingers were fused together, and the thumbs stuck out like a little flesh mitten. Her hips were in place, and her legs were one long line down to her ankles, straight, no bending at the knees for the Barbies of the 60s. Laura's nodding, you remember these Barbies well. And they were perpetually, forever on tiptoe because they only wore stiletto-heeled shoes. Their heads only turned from side to side. It was kind of torture being a Barbie of the 60s. But it made them perfect for the game that Paula and I invented. A little game we called Rocket Barbies! Step 1 of Rocket Barbies, make sure there are no adults in sight. Step 2, take your Barbie and go through the sliding glass door on our back porch out to the concrete slab that faced down the little hill up to the big hill that was our backyard. Extend your Barbie arms to full upright and launch position. Grasp your Barbie firmly around the waist. Count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off. Hurl the Barbie into the air. The Barbies would go up, up, up against the blue Pennsylvania sky. And then gravity would happen, because gravity is not just a good idea, it is the law. The Barbies would hurl down, 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 and crash at the base of the hill. They did not burst into flame, which really disappoints children when I tell them this tale. They did not burst into flame, but I assuaged the children by saying, but sometimes an arm or a leg or their head would pop off. Yes, the kids say. This led to the second phase of Rocket Barbies, Barbie Ambulance Rescue. Paula and I watched a lot of medical shows. We knew what had to happen. We leaped into paramedic mode. We rolled down the hill to the rescue the Barbies with full sirens blaring. You can join me. Wee-hoo, 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 wee-hoo. We leaped to our feet. Now, on these medical shows, we had learned you had to do, as a good paramedic, triage and treat your patient's worst injury first. If your patient's head has popped off, you only have seconds to reattach it before serious permanent injury is involved. So our first priority was always popping the Barbie heads back on. Then we would pop back on the Barbie arms, pop back on the Barbie legs, carry the Barbies back up the hill, and launch them into the air again. Over and over and over and over. So by the end of the summer, Even Barbie was showing her age. Those legs were not snapping back on, those arms were not snapping back on. So at that point, it led to phase 3 of Rocket Barbies, Barbie Operating Room Theater. We would gather up the Barbies and assorted limbs, carry them up to the top of the hill where we had prepared an operating room. We'd taken a Kleenex box, a long oblong Kleenex box, emptied it out, turned it over. That was the operating table. We would place the Barbie on the operating table. Then we would gown up. Again, from medical shows, we knew this had to happen stat. So we would put on the fake robes, we would put on the fake booties, we would pretend to put on the gown, the mask, the gloves. Then Paula, who was the chief surgeon, would step up to the operating table and extend her hand. I was the assisting nurse. I slapped, and she would say, "Scalpel, please." Now I'm going to take a little pause here. My husband, Norm, has heard this story many times with great enjoyment. And at one point, he said to me very supportively, I think the word is scalpel. I think there's an L in it, not scalpel. And I said, really? I said, well, I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania Dutch country. We ate a lot of scrapple, so maybe it just sort of translated into scalpel. But I want to now be linguistically correct. So Paula would step up to the operating table, extend her hand, and say, "Scalpel, please." And I would put the imaginary scalpel into her hand, and then she would pretend to operate on the Barbies. And they don't call it operating theater for nothing. She would take the scalpel and plunge it into the Barbies midsection. Boom, 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 boom. Stuff that back in. Finally, she'd pretend to find a gallbladder or something that you could throw away, toss it over her shoulder, pretend to sew the Barbie up. Then she'd give the Barbie to me to bandage. That's what we used all the Kleenex that we had emptied out of the Kleenex box for. Wrap the Barbie up. Sometimes Scotch tape was involved if we could filch a little of that from my mom's desk, until the Barbie looked like a little Barbie mummy. Then I would lean the Barbie mummy against the side of the house to look out over the cow pasture next door and think healing thoughts. Paula would get off to play golf with our croquet set, because we knew that's what doctors did when they weren't operating. Golf. And I would complete phase 4 of Rocket Barbies. I would turn into Ann, ace reporter for Barbie Rocket News. I would get my pretend microphone and interview the Barbie. "So, how did it feel to almost go in space?" "Great, what did it feel like when you were hurtling back to the Earth?" "Okay, I'm going to go write it up." I would write it up. These little newspapers I'd put together, try to sell them for a nickel. No one would buy them. But it did teach me the value of self-publishing, which I hold firm today. So here's the thing about this. More than 50 years after those 2 little girls were out in the backyard playing Rocket Barbies, I'm a storyteller. I get paid to make up stories, write them down, tell them out loud. My friend Paula, who my husband Norm and I are going to go visit after this festival, she still lives in Pennsylvania. She's a nurse. She runs a whole floor at a hospital. Sometimes she uses Kleenex, sometimes she uses other kinds of equipment, probably even a Barbie doll if that is called for. So I am here to tell you that if you imagine it, you can be it. Because from imagination to reality is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off! Yes!